The stars were dying. Not the bright burning kind of death that came with explosions and light shows. This was the slow, cold death that came when entire worlds went silent, one by one. Admiral Nexus floated in his command chamber aboard the Coalition flagship. His translucent blue form rippled with worry as he watched the holographic display. Red markers spread across the galaxy map like a disease. Each red dot meant another star system had fallen to the Vorthak Empire. The Vorthak were unstoppable. They moved like a gray tide across space, consuming everything in their path. They were part machine, part biological creature, and all nightmare. When they took a world, nothing remained but stripped rock and silence. "How many ships do they have now?" Nexus asked his aide. "Our scouts report over 50,000 war vessels, sir, and they keep building more." Nexus closed his eyes. The Coalition had maybe 8,000 ships total. The math was simple and terrible. The Coalition was made up of dozens of different alien races. The Thraxians looked like giant insects with razor-sharp claws. The Lumians were living crystals that sang beautiful songs. The Etherians had no solid bodies at all, just clouds of thinking gas. They were all very different, but they shared one thing. They were all going to die. "Sir, we have a transmission from the human homeworld," the aide said. Nexus had almost forgotten about the humans. They were a new species, discovered just 2 years ago. Their planet called Earth was small and far from the fighting. Most Coalition members barely knew they existed. "Put it through," Nexus said. The hologram showed a human male in simple clothing. He had dark hair and calm eyes. This was Ambassador Juan, Earth's representative to the Coalition. "Admiral Nexus," Juan said with a slight bow. "We received your message asking for military assistance." "Yes," Nexus replied. "We need every ship, every soldier. The Vorthak have billions of warriors. We must match their numbers or we will all perish." Juan was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke carefully. "Admiral, Earth cannot provide the kind of army you are asking for. We have only 8 billion people total, but we would like to help in our own way." Nexus felt his hopes sink. 8 billion sounded like a lot, but most species had populations in the trillions. The Thraxians alone had over 200 billion soldiers ready to fight. "How many troops can you send?" Nexus asked, trying to hide his disappointment. "We will send our best people," Juan said, "but not armies. Humans do not fight that way." "I do not understand," Nexus said. "How else does one fight a war?" "You will see," Juan replied. "Expect our ships in 3 days." The transmission ended. Nexus turned to his aide, who was a Thraxian officer named Click 9. "What do you think they mean?" Nexus asked. Click 9 made a sound like angry static. "Probably another diplomatic trick. These soft species always think they can solve everything with words." 3 days later, human ships arrived at Kepler Station, the Coalition's main base. Nexus watched them dock through his office window. The ships were strange. They were small and black, with smooth lines that seemed to bend light around them, nothing like the big, powerful warships of other species. Nexus counted 20 ships total. Even if each ship carried 1,000 soldiers, that was only 20,000 troops. The Vorthak had billions. The humans came aboard the station. Nexus was surprised by how few there were. He counted exactly 2,000 people. They wore simple black uniforms with no fancy decorations. They carried small weapons and light packs. They looked more like police officers than soldiers. The human leader introduced himself as Commander Deho. He was a man of medium height with short black hair and steady eyes. He did not look like someone who could save the galaxy. "Commander," Nexus said, trying to be polite, "thank you for coming. But I must ask, where is the rest of your army?" "This is our army," Deho replied. 2,000 people organized into 40 squads of 50 each. Click 9 made that angry static sound again. 2,000? "The Vorthak will crush you in minutes." Deho looked at the Thraxian officer with mild interest. "We do not plan to fight them directly." "Then how will you fight them?" Nexus asked. "Show us your enemies," Deho said simply. Nexus brought the humans to the main war room. The big display showed Vorthak forces moving toward 3 Coalition worlds. Millions of enemy ships advanced in perfect formation. It looked hopeless. "They attack in waves," Nexus explained. "First they destroy our space defenses. Then they land ground troops. They strip the planet of all resources and move on. We have tried to stop them, but they always have more ships than we do." Deho studied the display for a long time. Then he turned to his people. They were divided into groups, each group led by a different person. There was Mina, a quiet woman with sharp eyes. Taejun, a young man who smiled too much, so young, who looked like she could see through walls, and dozens of others all calm and ready. When do they attack next? Daeho asked. The Zarian system. In 5 days, Nexus replied. Good, Daeho said. We will need 3 days to prepare. Prepare for what? Click9 demanded. You cannot fight their whole fleet with 50 people. Daeho looked at the angry Thraxian. You are right. We cannot fight their fleet, he paused. We do not plan to. Then what do you plan to do? Nexus asked, his patience running thin. Something different, Daeho replied. He turned to his people. Squad leaders, get your teams ready. We have work to do. As the humans filed out of the war room, Nexus heard one of them talking to another. Think they will understand? The first human asked. Eventually, the second replied. After we show them. Nexus watched them go, feeling more confused than ever. The fate of the galaxy depended on these strange, quiet people. But they did not act like any soldiers he had ever seen. Perhaps that was the point. The mining world of Zarian 7 should have been an easy target for the Vorthak Empire. The planet had weak defenses, valuable resources, and only a small coalition garrison. It was exactly the kind of world the Vorthak loved to attack. Commander Daeho stood on the bridge of the coalition monitoring station, watching the tactical display. The Vorthak fleet was still 2 days away, moving through hyperspace like a storm of metal and death. Over 3,000 ships carrying millions of soldiers. Where are your people? Admiral Nexus asked. His blue form flickered with nervous energy. The battle will begin soon. They are already fighting, Daeho replied calmly. Nexus looked around the empty command center. I do not see them anywhere. That is the point, Daeho said. 2 days earlier, the human squads had scattered like seeds in the wind. They did not take big ships or heavy weapons. Instead, they slipped away in tiny craft that barely showed up on sensors. Most coalition officers thought they had run away. Squad Beta, led by Mina, was deep in Vorthak space. Their small ship drifted silently near a communication relay that the Vorthak used to coordinate their fleets. Mina and her team had been watching the relay for 20 hours, learning its patterns. Security sweep in 30 minutes, whispered Kyung-ho, her technical specialist. Same as always. 3 patrol ships, standard route, Mina nodded. The Vorthak were predictable. They followed patterns and procedures without thinking. It made them strong in direct combat, but weak in other ways. Yunji, how long do you need? Mina asked. Yunji was their infiltration expert. She could break into almost any computer system. Give me 10 minutes inside their network. I can plant something that will take weeks to find. What about the guards? Asked Jongsu, their weapons specialist. We do not kill the guards, Mina said. We make them kill each other. When the patrol ships arrived for their regular sweep, they found the communication relay working perfectly. Their sensors showed nothing unusual. But deep in the computer system, Yunji had planted a small program. It would wait and watch, then strike at exactly the right moment. Meanwhile, Squad Gamma was taking a different approach. Taejun led his team to a massive Vorthak supply depot 3 star systems away from the main battle. The depot fed resources to dozens of Vorthak fleets. It was heavily guarded and seemed impossible to attack. How do we get inside? Asked Hyejin, looking at the fortress-like structure through their scout ship's cameras. We do not, Taejun replied. We let them invite us in. His team watched as Vorthak supply ships came and went from the depot. Each ship followed the same route and used the same identification codes. Taejun smiled. Patterns again. Dongwu, can you copy their ship signals? He asked. Dongwu was their communications expert. Already done, but they will scan us when we approach. No problem, said Jihai, their disguise specialist. I can make our ship look like anything on their sensors. And if they board us for inspection? Heejin asked. Taejun held up a small device. Then they get a very big surprise. Back at Zarian 7, the coalition fleet was preparing for battle. Thraxian fighters practiced attack formations. Lumian ships charged their crystal cannons. Etherian vessels swirled in complex defensive patterns. Everyone was ready to fight and die. Squad Delta, led by So Young, was the only human unit near the battle zone. But they were not preparing to fight the Vorthak fleet. Instead, they were studying the planet below. The Vorthak always follow the same invasion plan, So Young explained to her team. First, they destroy orbital defenses. Then they land at specific points and set up bases. Then they spread out to strip the planet clean. So we hit them when they land? Asked Minjai. We hit them before they land, So Young replied. At their staging area, her team looked confused. The Vorthak staging area was in hyperspace, where they gathered their forces before jumping to normal space. No one could attack ships in hyperspace. That is impossible, said Young-hee, their pilot. So Young smiled. Impossible for normal tactics. But we are not using normal tactics. As the hours passed, more reports came in from human squads scattered across Vorthak space. Squad Epsilon had disabled a major shipyard. Squad Zeta had infected an entire communications network with confusion programs. Squad Eta had convinced 3 Vorthak commanders that their allies were actually enemies. I do not understand, Admiral Nexus said to Deho. Your people are attacking everything except the fleet that threatens us. The fleet is not the real enemy, Deho explained. The fleet is just a tool. We attack the hand that holds the tool. But the fleet will still arrive, Nexus protested. Millions of Vorthak soldiers will still land on Zarian 7. Will they? Deho asked. At that moment, alarms began ringing throughout Vorthak space. At the communication relay, Mina's hidden program activated. It sent false orders to dozens of Vorthak fleets, telling them to change course and attack different targets. Chaos spread through their command structure as commanders tried to figure out what was happening. At the supply depot, Taejun's team had been discovered. But instead of fighting, they had released a cloud of nanobots that began eating the metal structure from the inside. The depot was collapsing, and all the supplies inside were being destroyed. In the staging area, So Young's impossible plan was working. Her team had found a way to send signals into hyperspace by bouncing them off quantum fluctuations. The signals made the Vorthak fleet think they were under attack by invisible enemies. Millions of ships began firing at shadows and each other. The Vorthak fleet that was supposed to attack Zarion 7 never arrived. Half the ships were lost in friendly fire incidents. The other half were recalled to defend more important targets. The invasion was called off before it began. Admiral Nexus stared at the empty space where the enemy fleet should have been. How did you do this? We studied them, Deho said. The Vorthak are strong because they work together perfectly. But that is also their weakness. When their coordination breaks down, they become helpless. You turned their strength against them, Nexus said, understanding finally starting to dawn. Now you begin to see, Deho replied. We do not fight armies. We eliminate the ability to field armies. Click 9 was silent for once, his aggressive static replaced by thoughtful clicking sounds. What happens next? Nexus asked. Deho looked at the tactical display, where red markers were beginning to flicker and change to yellow as Vorthak forces lost coordination across multiple sectors. Next, we teach you how to think like humans, he said. The real war is just beginning. News of the failed Zarian 7 invasion spread through Vorthak space like wildfire. For the first time in their species' history, a major assault had been stopped without a single direct battle. Vorthak commanders gathered in emergency councils trying to understand what had happened. Commander Deho stood before the Coalition Council on Kepler Station. The Great Chamber was filled with representatives from dozens of alien species. All of them wanted to know how the humans had achieved the impossible. You must teach us your methods, demanded High General Threx Prime, leader of the Thraxian military. His insect-like form clicked with excitement. We can train our soldiers to fight like yours. Deho shook his head. Your soldiers are excellent fighters, but this is not about fighting. This is about thinking differently. Explain, said Crystal Singer Lum 7, speaking for the Lumians. Her crystalline body chimed softly as she moved. Watch, Deho said simply. On the other side of the galaxy, Squad Epsilon was beginning their most dangerous mission yet. Led by Jiho, they had traveled deep into the heart of Vorthak space. Their target was not a military base or supply depot. It was something much more important, the Vorthak home system itself. Are we really going to attack their home world? Asked team member Na Young, staring at the massive planet on their scanner. We are not going to attack anything, Jiho replied. We are going to learn. The Vorthak homeworld was the most heavily defended place in the galaxy. Millions of ships patrolled the system. Orbital platforms bristled with weapons. The planet itself was covered in cities that stretched from pole to pole. But Jiho's team was not interested in the defenses. They wanted to understand how the Vorthak thought and lived. For 3 days, they hid their small ship in an asteroid field and watched. They listened to communications. They studied traffic patterns. They learned. They are all connected, reported Sungmin, their intelligence analyst. Every Vorthak is linked to every other Vorthak through quantum communication implants. They share thoughts and decisions instantly. That explains their coordination, said Juhi. They fight as one mind with billions of bodies. Jiho smiled. And what happens when you disrupt that connection? Meanwhile, Squad Zeta was working on a different kind of warfare. Led by Yoon Seo, they had infiltrated Vorthak communication networks not to destroy them, but to change them. Instead of spreading chaos, they were spreading ideas. Upload the new content package, Yoon Seo instructed her team. Target the entertainment feeds first. The Vorthak consumed media the same way they did everything else collectively. When one Vorthak watched a program, millions of others shared the experience through their neural links. It was an efficient system, but it had a weakness. What exactly are we sending them? Asked team member Bongsu. Stories, Yoon Seo replied. Human stories about individual choice, about questioning authority, about thinking for yourself. The content looked harmless, simple tales about people making their own decisions. But for a species that had never experienced individual thought, these stories were like mental viruses. They spread through the Vorthak network, causing confusion and doubt. Back on Kepler Station, General Hyun Woo was explaining human military philosophy to a room full of coalition officers. Hyun Woo had been a Special Forces commander on Earth before the war started. Now he was teaching aliens how to think like humans. Most species see war as a contest of strength, he said. You build bigger armies, better weapons, stronger defenses. But humans learned something different during our history. What did you learn? Asked Admiral Nexus. We learned that the strongest army is useless if it cannot think clearly, Hyun-woo replied. We learned that destroying the enemy's ability to fight is better than destroying the enemy himself. He pointed to a holographic display showing human tactics. On Earth, small groups of humans regularly defeated much larger forces, not through superior strength but through superior strategy. Click 9, the Thraxian officer, was fascinated. You mean a few warriors can defeat an army? If they know how, Hyun-woo confirmed. But it requires a different way of thinking. You must stop trying to match the enemy's strength and start targeting his weaknesses. The lesson was interrupted by urgent reports from Vorthak space. Squad Epsilon's intelligence gathering had revealed something extraordinary. The Vorthak neural network had a central hub. Every thought, every decision, every command flowed through quantum processors on their home world. It is like a giant brain, Jiho reported to Daeho through encrypted channels. Cut the connections and billions of Vorthak become isolated and confused. Do not attack it, Daeho warned. Study it first. Learn how it works. At the same time, Yoon Seo's cultural warfare was having unexpected effects. Vorthak across dozens of star systems were beginning to question their orders. Some were refusing to attack. Others were asking why they needed to conquer other species at all. The stories are working too well, Yoon Seo reported. Entire sectors are going offline as Vorthak disconnect from the network to think alone. Good, Daeho replied. Let them think. The coalition officers watching these developments were amazed. The humans were not just winning battles. They were changing the fundamental nature of their enemies. This is incredible, Admiral Nexus said. You are turning the Vorthak into individuals. We are giving them a choice, Daeho corrected. What they do with that choice is up to them. But the Vorthak Empire was beginning to adapt. Their leaders recognized the threat that human tactics represented. They started fragmenting their command structure to prevent total network collapse. They developed new security protocols to stop infiltration. They even began creating isolated units that could operate without the neural network. They are learning, reported Squad Alpha leader Min Ah during a briefing. Our old tricks will not work much longer. Then we teach new tricks, Daeho replied. To everyone. He turned to the coalition officers. Your species have advantages that humans do not possess. Thraxians can move through spaces we cannot reach. Lumians can process information faster than our computers. Etherians can pass through solid matter. You want us to form mixed teams? General Threx Prime asked. I want you to stop thinking like your own species, Daeho said. Start thinking like humans. But use your own abilities to do it. Over the following weeks, something unprecedented happened. Thraxian soldiers began forming small infiltration teams instead of massive assault forces. Lumion scientists developed new ways to hack enemy systems using crystalline resonance. Etherian scouts learned to phase through enemy ships and disable them from within. The war was changing. Instead of vast fleets clashing in space, small teams struck at critical targets. Instead of direct confrontation, psychological and cultural warfare became the norm. The Vorthak found themselves fighting an enemy they could not understand or predict. Status report. Deho requested during a council meeting. 40% of Vorthak sectors have ceased offensive operations, Admiral Nexus reported. 20% have gone completely silent. The remainder are adapting defensive postures. Casualties on our side? Minimal. Less than 1,000 coalition personnel lost in the past month. The chamber fell silent. In the old way of fighting, a month of war would have cost millions of lives. How long can we maintain this? Asked Crystal Singer Lum 7. Deho looked at the strategic display, where the red markers of Vorthak territory were increasingly mixed with yellow zones of uncertainty and green areas of pacified space. As long as they keep trying to fight a war, he said. We are not fighting a war anymore. We are conducting a revolution. The Vorthak Empire was dying, but it was not going quietly. Supreme Coordinator Vorth Prime stood in the central command chamber of the homeworld, watching as his empire crumbled on the strategic display. Half of his territories showed yellow or red warning lights. Communications with dozens of sectors had been lost completely. The perfectly ordered machine of conquest that had dominated the galaxy for centuries was falling apart. Analysis, he commanded. His aide, Sub-Coordinator Vorth 7, brought up detailed reports. The humans have introduced chaos into our systems. Our standard response protocols are ineffective against their methods. Then we adapt, Vorth Prime decided. Fragment all command structures. Create independent operational units. Eliminate the network vulnerabilities they have been exploiting. It was a radical decision. For the first time in their history, the Vorthak would fight as separate groups instead of one unified force. It went against everything their species believed in. But survival demanded change. On Kepler Station, Commander Deho was not surprised when intelligence reports showed the Vorthak adapting their tactics. They are learning, he told the assembled coalition leaders. This was always going to happen. Is this bad for us? Admiral Nexus asked, his blue form flickering with concern. It is good, Deho replied. When they fragment their command, they become more like us. That means we can predict their behavior better. Squad Theta, led by Kyung-min, was already working on the next phase of human strategy. Their mission was not to fight the Vorthak directly, but to teach other coalition species how to think like humans while using their own unique abilities. Today we work with the Thraxians, Kyung-min announced to her team. They want to learn our infiltration techniques. The Thraxian volunteers were led by Click 9, the officer who had once doubted human methods. Now he was eager to learn everything the humans could teach. Your species has natural advantages for this work, Kyung-min explained. You can fit through small spaces, climb on any surface, and move silently when needed. We just need to change how you think about using those abilities. Show us, Click 9 said, his voice full of determination. Instead of teaching the Thraxians to copy human techniques, Kyung-min showed them how to develop their own methods. Soon, Thraxian teams were infiltrating Vorthak facilities in ways no human could manage. They could crawl through ventilation systems too small for other species, hide in spaces that seemed impossible to reach, and strike at targets that appeared completely secure. Meanwhile, Squad Iota, led by Jin Woo and his partner Ha Young, was working on something much more ambitious. They were not just targeting Vorthak military assets or communication networks. They were attacking the philosophical foundations of Vorthak society itself. Every species has core beliefs that define how they see the universe, Ha Young explained to her team. The Vorthak believe in perfect order, absolute efficiency, and collective purpose. What happens if we introduce the opposite concepts? Chaos theory, Jin Woo added. The idea that small changes can have huge, unpredictable effects. For a species that depends on total control, this concept is like poison. Their target was the Vorthak educational system. Every young Vorthak learned the same lessons, followed the same paths, accepted the same truths. But Jin Woo and Ha Young began introducing subtle changes to those lessons. Questions instead of answers. Uncertainty instead of absolute knowledge. The possibility that there might be more than one right way to do things. The effects were slow but devastating. Young Vorthak began questioning their elders. They started experimenting with different ideas. Some even began to reject the neural network connections that linked them to the collective consciousness. Sector 12 reports widespread civil unrest. Sub-Coordinator Vorth 7 informed his superior, young Vorthak are refusing to accept assignments. Some are even leaving their home worlds. Vorth Prime studied the reports with growing alarm. The humans were not just attacking his military forces. They were attacking the very concept of what it meant to be Vorthak. Countermeasures, he asked. We could isolate the affected populations, Vorth 7 suggested. Cut their access to the network entirely. That would make them independent, Vorth Prime realized. They would become like the humans. It was an impossible choice. Keep the connections and risk further contamination, or cut the connections and lose control entirely. Back in Coalition space, the war was transforming in ways no one had expected. Squad Kappa, led by Wu Jin, had convinced an entire Lumian battle group to try something unprecedented: psychological warfare using crystalline song. Lumian music affects brain chemistry, Wu Jin explained to the crystal beings. You could create songs that cause specific emotional responses in enemy species. The Lumians were initially reluctant. Their songs were considered sacred, used only for communication and art. But as they learned more about human tactics, they began to see new possibilities. We could compose songs that inspire doubt in Vorthak minds, Crystal Singer Lum 7 suggested. Music that makes them question their orders. Or songs that enhance creativity and independent thinking, added another Lumian. We could help the Vorthak discover individuality through art. The first Lumian psychological operations began within days. Crystalline songs were broadcast on Vorthak communication frequencies, hidden within routine transmissions. The music was beautiful and haunting, unlike anything the Vorthak had ever heard. More importantly, it carried emotional messages that bypassed their logical thinking and spoke directly to their subconscious minds. Squad Lambda, led by Sheng Ho, was working with the Etherians on even stranger techniques. The gas-form aliens could phase through solid matter, making them perfect for a new kind of warfare that the humans called presence operations. You do not need to damage anything, Seong Ho explained to the Etherian volunteers. Just being inside enemy ships is enough. Your presence will create uncertainty and fear. The Etherians began appearing on Vorthak vessels without warning. They would materialize in command centers, engineering sections, and crew quarters. They did not attack anyone or damage any equipment. They just watched and waited, visible but untouchable. The psychological effect on Vorthak crews was enormous. How do you fight an enemy that can appear anywhere at any time? How do you maintain discipline when strange beings are constantly watching you? Many Vorthak ships simply abandoned their missions and returned to base, their crews too nervous to continue. As these new tactics spread throughout the coalition forces, the nature of the war changed completely. The Vorthak found themselves fighting not just humans, but alien species that had learned to think like humans while using their own unique abilities. Status report: Vorth Prime demanded during an emergency council session. 90% of our sectors report some form of infiltration or subversion. Vorth 7 replied. Military effectiveness has dropped to 30% of normal levels. Civilian populations are showing signs of what the humans call individuality syndrome. And our attempts to negotiate? The humans refuse to discuss terms, another aide reported. They say the war will end when we choose to end it. Vorth Prime was silent for a long moment. His empire had conquered hundreds of species over the centuries. None had ever presented a challenge like this. The humans were not trying to defeat the Vorthak in battle. They were trying to transform them into something completely different. What did they want from us? He asked. Evolution, came the answer from an unexpected source. One of his own subordinates, a young Vorthak who had been exposed to human propaganda, spoke up. They want us to become individuals instead of a collective. They want us to choose our own paths instead of following orders. The chamber fell silent. Speaking such ideas aloud had once been considered treason. Now half the Vorthak in the room were nodding in agreement. And if we refuse? Vorth Prime asked. Then we continue to fragment until there is no empire left. The young Vorthak replied. The choice is ours to make. For the first time in his life, Vorth Prime found himself truly alone with his thoughts. The neural network that had always provided guidance and certainty was silent. He had to decide for himself what to do next. The concept terrified him, but it also felt strangely liberating. Outside the command chamber, across the vast empire that was no longer an empire, millions of Vorthak were making similar discoveries. The war was ending, not through conquest or surrender, but through transformation. The humans had kept their promise. They had not sent an army to fight the Vorthak. They had sent teachers to show them a different way to exist. Whether the Vorthak would accept that lesson remained to be seen. 6 months after the first human ships had arrived at Kepler Station, the galaxy was unrecognizable. The Vorthak Empire no longer existed. In its place were hundreds of independent sectors, each making its own choices about how to live and interact with their neighbors. Some had formed peaceful trading partnerships with coalition worlds. Others had isolated themselves completely, wanting time to discover what it meant to be individuals. A few had transcended into something entirely new, combining their technological abilities with newly discovered creativity to explore realms of science and art that no one had imagined possible. Commander Deho stood in his quarters aboard the human flagship, packing his few belongings. Through the viewport, he could see coalition and former Vorthak ships working together to repair damage from the old war. It was a sight that would have been impossible to imagine just months ago. A soft chime indicated someone requesting entry. "Come in," Deho called. Admiral Nexus floated into the room, his blue form shimmering with something that might have been sadness. "So you are really leaving?" "Our work here is finished," Deho replied simply. "The Coalition Council has voted to offer humanity full membership," Nexus said. "We want to formalize our alliance. Create permanent military agreements. Learn more of your methods." Deho paused in his packing. "And what did Ambassador Juan tell you?" "That humans prefer to remain consultants," Nexus admitted. "But surely you understand how valuable your knowledge is. What you have taught us could transform how the entire galaxy approaches conflict." "That was the point," Deho said. "But the lesson is only useful if you learn to apply it yourselves, without depending on us." Down in the station's main conference room, So Young was conducting her final briefing for coalition military leaders. The room was packed with representatives from dozens of species, all eager to understand the human approach to warfare. "The most important thing to remember," So Young said, "is that we did not defeat the Vorthak through superior firepower or better technology. We defeated them by changing the rules of engagement." General Threx Prime, who now commanded integrated Thraxian Lumian infiltration teams, clicked thoughtfully. "You made their strengths irrelevant. More than that," So Young replied. "We helped them discover that their supposed strengths were actually limitations. Perfect order prevented adaptation. Absolute unity eliminated creativity. Total efficiency made them predictable," Crystal Singer Lum 7 chimed softly. "So the real victory was not destroying them, but freeing them. The real victory was showing everyone that there are alternatives to endless conflict," So Young said. "Violence should be the last option, not the first," Lick 9, who had transformed from a skeptical officer into one of the most effective practitioners of human-style tactics, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "What happens when we face the next threat? The next species that wants to conquer the galaxy?" So Young smiled. "You apply what you have learned. But more importantly, you teach them what we taught you." Across the station, other human squad leaders were conducting similar final sessions. Minna was showing Etherian operatives how to use their phasing abilities for intelligence gathering, instead of just warfare. Taijun was teaching Lumian engineers how to think creatively about problem solving. Yunseo was explaining to communication specialists from multiple species how ideas could be more powerful than weapons. In a quiet observation deck, 2 humans sat watching the bustling activity of the station. Minna and Taejun had worked together on several missions during the war, and now they were sharing a drink as they prepared to return to Earth. "Think they really learned the lesson?" Taejun asked, echoing the same question he had asked months ago when their ships first arrived. Minna considered the question while watching a mixed group of Thraxian, Lumian, and former Vorthak beings working together on a joint project. "They learned a lesson," she said. "Whether it is the right one will depend on what they do next." "The Vorthak seem to be adapting well," Taejun observed. "Most of the reports from their former territories are positive." "The young ones are," Minna agreed. They are excited about making their own choices. The older ones are having a harder time adjusting to independence. Through the viewport, they could see a remarkable sight: a former Vorthak vessel docking with a coalition ship. The two crews would work together to establish a new trade route, something that would have been impossible under the old empire. "Contact from Earth," announced the station's communication system. "All human personnel report to Docking Bay 7 for departure." Minna and Taejun finished their drinks and headed for the departure area. Along the way, they passed coalition officers who had learned human tactics, former Vorthak individuals who were discovering freedom for the first time, and mixed teams of various species working on projects that combined their unique abilities with human strategic thinking. At the docking bay, Commander Daeho was saying goodbye to Admiral Nexus and the other coalition leaders who had gathered to see the humans off. "We will miss your guidance," Nexus said formally, "but I think I understand why you must leave. We need to prove that we can apply these lessons without depending on you." "Exactly," Daeho replied. "The moment you start depending on us to solve your problems, you stop learning how to solve them yourselves." "Will we see you again?" asked Click 9, who had formed an unexpected friendship with several human operatives. "If you really need us," Daeho said. "But I suspect you will find that you need us less and less as time goes on." The human squads boarded their ships with the same quiet efficiency they had shown when arriving. No ceremonies, no grand speeches, no promises of eternal alliance. They simply completed their mission and went home. As the human ships departed, Admiral Nexus reflected on everything that had changed. The galaxy was no longer divided between the Coalition and the Empire. Instead, it was becoming a complex network of independent worlds and sectors, each finding their own way to coexist. "Status: report on former Vorthak territories," he requested from his aide. "Sector: Alpha 7 has established a democratic government and open trade relations with 3 coalition worlds," the aide replied. "Sector Beta 3 has chosen isolation but promises non-aggression. Sector Gamma 1 has apparently transcended physical limitations entirely and is exploring higher dimensions. Any conflicts? Minor disputes, but they are being resolved through negotiation rather than warfare." "The new approach seems to be working," Nexus nodded. The humans had kept their promise in an unexpected way. They had not sent an army to fight a war. They had sent teachers to end the possibility of future wars. On the bridge of the departing human flagship, Daeho stood watching the galaxy shrink behind them. His communication officer approached with a final message. "Admiral Nexus asks if you have any final advice for the Coalition," the officer reported. Daeho thought for a moment, then dictated his response. "Remember that strength is not about how much force you can apply, but about how rarely you need to apply it. The greatest victory is the battle you never have to fight." As Earth grew larger in their viewports, the human crews prepared to return to their normal lives. They had not conquered the galaxy or established an empire. They had done something much more valuable. They had shown an entire galaxy how to think differently about conflict and cooperation. The war was over. But more importantly, future wars had become much less likely. The galaxy had learned that there were better ways to resolve differences than through destruction. In the final analysis, the galaxy had asked for an army to fight their enemies. Humanity had sent teachers to help their enemies become friends. It was, perhaps, the most human solution possible. Years later, when historians wrote about the Vorthak War, they would mark it as the beginning of a new age, not because one side had defeated another, but because both sides had learned to become something better than they were before. The title of their history books would be simple: The War That Ended War. And in small print at the bottom, they would add, "A human approach to galactic peace